That's the hospital, and Daesh have surrendered inside.
The liberation of Raqqa was a weight off my shoulders. It was something that I've been fighting for 3 years now. It was a brutal and difficult fight, Raqqa. Hundreds of SDF fighters died. The city was severely damaged by the airstrikes and by the Islamic State's tactics overall. And to come to the end of all this was a massive relief. But then there was also a great deal of sadness as well, because some of the people I'd started out on this journey with had died, and they weren't at the end, and some of them had even died within a few days of the liberation. So it was a real mixed feelings. Now that ISIS have been defeated in Raqqa, and in Mosul too, they've scattered. Their so-called caliphate has imploded. At the end of the day, there's two sides to the Islamic State. They were a state in every sort of sense of the word. They had the infrastructure, they had the financing, and they had the territory of what you could call a state. That's now gone. We've defeated it. Russia, Britain, the Iraqi government, the Peshmerga, all together in various parts of Iraq and Syria had defeated the Islamic State, the physical Islamic State. The difficulty now is that the twisted ideology that underpins the Islamic State is the next thing that we've really got to go after. Because, of course, these people are still out there, they're still running around in the desert, but a lot of them are dead men walking, almost. They're running out of time, and they're reverting back to the tactics that they used pre-2010. So they're going back to an insurgency-based terrorist group, and if I'm honest, they're not the biggest problem at the moment. The biggest problem is coming up with a democratic framework where we can start a comprehensive ceasefire all across Syria, and we get all the different parties starting to get around the table and talk about the future. Turkey and Saudi are facing is that they're not representing all of Syria. They're backing groups. Some groups within the FSA are just as bad as the Islamic State. We have to be absolutely clear with people about that. Many more are nationalists who want to see a very different Syria that the rest of the world really wants to see. And the frustrating thing is these people are also very unmovable. They have got one objective in mind, and that's the removal of Assad, that they want to keep out minority groups and they want to dominate the narrative. And it's deeply frustrating for those that actually want a very realistic, very pragmatic approach and an inclusive one too. The Russian track is actually very workable, but it's not in its current form, in my opinion. What I want them to do is not to bow to any pressure from Saudi or Turkey and not invite the Kurds. They are far too big to leave out. And what's incredible is that the Russians by far have the greatest will and the most amount of influence to affect change. And at the moment, sure, we're going through the preliminary negotiations, we're talking at the moment, but it's deeply worrying for me as a humanitarian and as an activist not to see the invitation already reached out to the SDF, primarily because it's not realistic. If you don't invite these people who control 25% of Syrians' territory and are democratic, and they also are Syrians, they're not foreigners, it means that any future deal will be unworkable. So what I hope to see very soon is an open invite very shortly from the Russian government to the SDF. I don't think they've properly understood the crisis, and certainly not Britain. Britain is actually one of the worst. And the real challenge now is to get a ceasefire. We need the world to realise that that the reality is Assad is here to stay. He's won the Syrian civil war. He defeated the FSA in Aleppo, and the FSA is divided. It's weak. It's pulling in different directions, and it's not at all a coherent opposition to anybody, and it's certainly not capable of starting a government by any stretch of the imagination. So what I want to do is I want an immediate ceasefire. I want all the people of Syria to get round the table, and we need a coalition of the willing, where people talk about the future, about a democratic Syria, a secular Syria, one that's built to last and one that's built for everybody. And the SDF have a huge role to play in this. And as Syrians, they're very much open just to seeing Assad stay, and as long as there's democracy, the people will then choose in the future whether he stays or goes. But it's got to be the Syrians that decide, not us, not the Brits and not the Americans.